so the people that are working with large companies that have at least an understanding that what they're doing is for the same client, if you will, it's one company. Do you see pain for Davis here in that every week he gets a new client with a completely new stack? Does that seem like something that would drive you insane? Manju, you want to?
Yeah, I can. So one thing I thought is the ideas behind what Davis was talking about is pair programming, and I think that's a foundation to that shared understanding becomes a foundation. For me, that becomes whichever company you go, you have the foundation of shared understanding and working together. It can be successful. Right, regardless of the technology stack, because if you are all working for the same goal and you are all together, I feel more powerful. I don't know, but you can.
No, excuse me. I think that's fair. I think I wouldn't want to paint it that we get 3,000 different configurations of tools. I think it's interesting. We're actually fairly technologically conservative for kind of that reason. We have a sense of using defaults, and that's what we call them sensible defaults is sort of the meme that we use, which is it includes open source libraries, templating systems, tools, servers, etc. Like the whole, like everything from databases all the way up to even in some situations the browsers we recommend depending on what stage the client's at. And so we don't keep a stable of people that can work with a whole bunch of different combinations. What we intend and still try to shoot for is here's a set of defaults that are really effective at getting business value in front of customers quickly. Mm-hmm. That sounds a little fuzzy, but it turns out that when you're a consultant, that's what makes clients happy. And when we shift from that, it's from one of these defaults, it's more because the client has some need, whether it's a process need or a technology need or something very concrete in business where the things that we know well don't work. Somebody, I forget who I was talking to at the beginning before we started talking, somebody mentioned Node.js, and I have got nothing against Node. I think Node's amazing. What Node's doing is great. We haven't had a project that came in the door that came in as we want to build so-and-so in Node that left as a Node project because it was, and this is not a slam on Node, this is more a slam on our client base, they were coming in with Node because that's what the developers wanted to work on, and they weren't thinking about the business need. So for us, if we're not getting a prototype in front of users, if we're not getting validating a business idea to whether it's determining funding or determining budget or determining whether it's a good idea, if we're not getting that in front of users quickly, for some definition of quickly, then we have failed as consultants. So we try to constrain as many of the variables as possible on the tool side.
Okay, so at what point will you, and this goes for everybody, at what point do you decide a new technology is something that it's stable enough or I want to embrace it for some reason? I mean, it seems like one motivation that Node has picked up so much is that developers seem to love it. And in this environment of who here doesn't need to hire someone, right? Like everyone here needs to hire somebody. So as a developer, it's kind of annoying, right? You're just constantly being asked. So the question I've got is that the reason why the companies are playing with Node in the stack, even though it's not even fully released, right? We're still aren't we in 0.0 of Node? Anybody? 0 point something.
0.10, right? I think.
Yeah, right. So we're not actually in a release candidate, right? Or a release candidate, I don't want to attack Node at all, but that's an interesting space to be in. So the question is the development happening in Node because of that need, or is there something else fundamental about pulling on new technology that's necessary?
So,
Manju?
So for us to go to Node was the ability to prototype and also take the same code to production. Right? Our dream is, I think, as a UI organization, we are a centralized UI organization. We see the need for new experiences, go for testing, and being out there to our customer base faster. And Node was, for us, a way to look at experience and make it go faster to production.
Are you in production with Node right now?
We are in our pilot right now.
Uh-huh. For back-end tool sets or for public clients?
For websites.
Wow. Anybody else? How do you decide on when to adapt the new technology? Matt?
Well, we're not using Node for anything. and that's just because we haven't had a business case to drive it. So I'm sure having a lot of JavaScript developers on the team would be excited to get an opportunity to it. But they also realize I don't need, a hammer for this. I need a screwdriver. And so what are the right tools for me to go and build what I need to build quickly? Much of our development team and much of our focus is on devices. And so the app architecture is very different than our website, which has been around for 10 plus years and is more of your traditional page-based Java stack, where it's a thick client, JavaScript, HTML, CSS loaded up front, and heavy REST API interactions. We don't really have a need for Node in that kind of environment.
You're basically coding all your front ends to your existing API for the server, right? I mean,
that's right. That's right. So we haven't had a need for Node, but we did have a need to evolve our REST API, which was started as a third-party public API for people to build apps, and that didn't really materialize into much. But we started using it when we needed to start building device UIs, and they had really particular performance constraints. And we found the chattiness of a typical, one-size-fits-all REST API wasn't ideal for our needs, and that's where we decided we really need to adopt a new technology.
Are you doing like Socket?
No, we're not doing sockets, but we designed an entirely new format for getting API and really moving the client kind of back to the server a little bit in terms of having a scripting tier, so we can create custom endpoints instead of the sort of defined endpoints that any third-party developer could use. So we can consolidate, instead of making 10 requests, following all the REST calls, we can make one request, get a very optimized payload back. And that's sort of, I guess, what I'm getting at is identifying that we need to evolve our technology.
You needed something fundamentally
This was an internal
different.
thing. This wasn't something that was available out on the market that could satisfy our specific needs. But there was a strong business case for it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so anybody else with the perspective of when to adopt new technology, how to decide what's the thing to pick next? Thoughts on that? We can go to something else too. Okay, let's talk about structuring teams. Okay, so do you structure teams based on their skill set, whether they're CSS, HTML, based on the device they're targeting to? Do you group people into, we need to target these types of devices, touch interfaces versus whatever? Or what's the other one? Well, that's a good way to think about it right there. So are you grouping your people off the groups you've got? Are you grouping them off of the type of device that they're serving, or the type of technology they're aware of?
Neither.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Anyone can. Yeah.
Yeah. So I hinted at this earlier. Where I'm a strong advocate of the strong generalist, but with focus. I joke that I came into web development as a Ruby developer. I'm now a JavaScript guy. And I was, 5 years ago, I was sort of afraid of JavaScript, and then I wrote a testing library, and now apparently I'm a JavaScript guy. But again, part of this is the bias that I come to this team here up front as a consultant, and we have to be flexible. But we still engender that as much as we can in our clients, because there's the idea of trying to raise the bus count as high as possible, right? If you have as much shared ownership on your team as you can push that to the absolute limit, while I could write SQL, you wouldn't pay me to write SQL, but I could, and it could work as much of the whole stack and be relatively productive. Again, getting to business value like Matt was talking about. The idea there is that if anybody could pick up any piece of the code and be productive with it, then that reduces a lot of stress on the business. So I would rather not. While again we're consultants, we do iOS, we do Android. There are people that are better at Objective-C than they are at Java, than they are Ruby and JS or CSS. So there's definitely going to be specialization. But in sort of this stack that we're talking about tonight, I would say that we definitely push as much as possible to have a team that it can at least be conversant in the whole stack.
Okay. Brent, you want to tell us what eBay thoughts on that?
eBay, from the top down, is sort of segregated, I would say. We have a mobile team, and the team that I'm in, the mandate is desktop. So in that sense, there's sort of a prescribed approach. As far
What do you
as-
think about it? You're on tape.
Well, I've actually tried to break down the walls quite a bit. Last year, we kind of subverted the system, and my team started working with the Tablet Web Group. And I think, it's been actually a really good experience across the board. And I think probably the overall organization is going to head more in that direction as we continue to grow. There's definitely a need from a user's experience standpoint that they need similarities between devices, and they need some sort of consistency as they approach these different devices.
So, Julie, you haven't spoken in a while.
Yeah. So I think at Yahoo, most of the organizational structure was centered around code bases who owned a certain project which was built by a certain piece of the code. So there's a lot of like front end, back end versus mobile separation. So like there was a Yahoo Mail front end team and a Yahoo Mail back end team and a Yahoo Mail mobile team. That was very code base oriented.
Okay.
At Facebook, we tend to be much more organized around goals or KPIs. So our teams I have a team that's focused on growth, and we drive towards growth metrics. I have
When you say growth, do you mean new users? Because I think you have
Right.
everybody now.
Yes.
Or do you mean more usage?
well, I manage the pages team, so
Okay.
we're looking at more pages.
More pages. It's,
Yes.
it's a growth in
Yes,
that. Okay.
and any kind of project or code base that we think is necessary to drive that growth, that's what we'll work on. So it's a lot more fluid. You can work in different parts of the stack.
So that team might say, we're getting no pages are being created by mobile. If we could do that, then we'd have a lot more. So you work on a mobile
Exactly.
implementation
Yep.
of pages. Okay.
Yep. Or we might say in Newsfeed, these pages stories could look a lot better. So we'll go and work on Newsfeed, and there's a whole other team that works on Newsfeed, but we'll go and make those stories look better for pages.
I've been noticing, I listen to a lot of other podcasts, and I've been noticing a lot of money from Facebook being thrown into to support design and wanting designers more. I see a lot of push on that. Are
Yes.
you short on designers, or what's going on there?
It feels like the entire industry is very designer constrained. I don't know if
Is
you
that-
know.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And
No
by the way,
question.
I'm hiring,
Design constrained.
and I like multidisciplinary designers, so
So
please.
So it's just that you have so much money that you're actually telling us that you need designers. Everybody else is trying. Okay, I got it. I'm sorry, I was talking about Facebook.
every feature you build, you've got to have constant design.
Yeah.
You've got to iterate. You've got to mutate. So it's a definite shortage across the company or across the industry.
Okay.
Yeah. So like we have growth goals. We'll have revenue goals. We won't really have product or code-based goals.
All right. Do you think that sounds like it's a very nimble strategy? And Facebook, of course, is the younger of the companies up here, besides maybe Pivotal. No, Pivotal's probably been around longer than Facebook.
In various forms, almost 20 years, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So as it's the young giant, that seems like the way to. I mean, can anybody say that's not the way to do this? This like almost small startup inside a company doing tasks at that level. It sounds like is that a good way to describe it, Julie?
Yeah, I would say the beauty of it is that anyone can go and modify any part of the code that's necessary to meet those objectives,
Whoa.
and that it's very bottoms up in terms of figuring out what are the actual features or products needed to meet those objectives.
Wow.
So it's not very top down where, some people or product managers are in a room and they think of the features needed for their code base. They're just thinking about the features needed to drive a metric, and it's from the bottoms up.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so I would say that we probably have a different model that's more separated by devices, and I think that grew organically, right? So we had a website first, and then
Well, you had a DVD service at one point.
we did,
Yeah.
and we still do.
Really?
Yeah, there are a few people using it. You'd be surprised.
Yeah, I bet.
And then TV devices came along, and we chose to go with a web technologies, not because we were in love with web technologies, because it was the only thing on TV-based devices that allowed us to dynamically update them independent of the traditional device firmware update cycle.
Right. You
And that
could
was-
tell them,
that was
put a
critical.
browser in it, people. Yeah.
That's right. So there wasn't a browser, so we put one in our app. We used WebKit. And so we evolved a TV code base And then mobile came along, and then we organically grew a mobile code base. So we actually have 3 code bases, but they're divided by the 3 major platforms that we focus on.
Okay.
And if we had to do it all over again, I think we'd still end up doing it that way because they each are solving very different problems. And I think if we had one common code base, it would be very hard for each of those teams that has to go in different directions and explore different areas. Like solving, momentum scrolling on iPad 1 or something is very different than trying to get a grid of box shots that you're moving through on a left, right, up, down remote. They're different problems to solve, different CPU constraints, memory issues. And
All right.